Well, joining us live on the show is James J. Marlowe, foreign and defense analyst, and he's, of course, an expert on West Asia. Welcome to the broadcast. Thanks for your time. Now, as part of the transition process, Donald Trump and Joe Biden met and discussed the wars in Ukraine and West Asia. What do you suspect Trump's policies towards West Asia to look like? A lot has been said about it. After Biden's icy relations with Putin, Trump, in fact, went ahead and spoke to Putin, and he's also spoken to Netanyahu. We have heard of likes of Kushner talking about creating waterfront properties on Gaza because of its weather. What do you think is the road ahead looking like from here on?
Well, firstly, on President-elect Trump, he's always said, and he said throughout his campaign, that he does not want war. It's interesting that a lot of people did say, if you elect him, he is a man of war, because they don't quite understand where he's coming from in certain issues, because he plays his cards very close to his chest. But nevertheless, I think it's fair to say now that Trump is against war. So what he will say to the Israelis, and what he's already saying, because there have been politicians who have gone out to see him in person. Ron Dermer is somebody who just met with him a couple of days ago. Ron Dermer is the former Israeli ambassador to America. Also, he is the Minister of Strategic Affairs and very close to Prime Minister Netanyahu. So Trump has told him, you got to get these wars finished. And the Israelis agree with that. This is the war that Israel did not want, it did not expect, it was not prepared for, and yet now it finds itself fighting on 7 different fronts. The 2 main fronts, of course, are in Gaza and in Lebanon. And I think one of the reasons why it's gone on so long is because that the last administration, and because I'm independent, I can say this, where Israeli officials cannot say this, but the last administration tied Israel's hands behind their back. For example, inside of Gaza, Rafah, where it's believed that 101 hostages, Israeli hostages, are still being held in the terror tunnels beneath, and some of those terror tunnels go down up to 5 different levels. And Biden and his administration said, don't go in there. They were outside for 3 months. They could have easily gone on in there, evacuated the civilians, and then just dealt with Hamas there and then. And I had a feeling that it would probably not be the situation whereby, as a result, now Hamas is regrouping in the north. So in terms of what Trump will do, he will just say, let's get this war finished. The new Secretary of State coming in, Marco Rubio, he's very pro-Israel. He wants the war to finish, but he also wants Hezbollah and Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Fatah al-Aqsa and the Mujahideen and all the other groups who are against Israel, who want its destruction. He wants them gone, or at least, at the very least, demilitarized. And that's Israel's objective.
How do you suspect Trump to achieve those goals? We know that he still has some time to come into power as president. But, you know, when we talk about the numbers, the sheer casualties, and of course, there was a UNSC meet in New York which spoke of the looming famine in Gaza and 8 trucks not being allowed inside the borders. Time is running out when it comes to civilian casualties. How do you suspect Trump is going to achieve these targets?
Well, if I can just pick up on that last point firstly, because there's a number of things in there. That last point with regard to the aid trucks coming in. Now, I was on that border last month, and I saw specifically the aid trucks, humanitarian trucks, those with food, those with medicine, those with water coming in. Now, what Cogate, that's C-O-G-A-T, and you can follow them on Twitter or X, they are the ones specifically responsible for coordinating all the aid going into Israel via land, via sea, via air. There's no more air at this time. But nevertheless, there are around 150 trucks going in per day. Now, it's Israel's job to get the trucks inside of Gaza. It's not Israel's job to deliver those aid trucks to the civilian population, specifically in the north, where they are struggling. I accept that, certainly in the north, more so than in the south. But they then put a drone up in the air, and you can see those trucks still there 24 hours later. In fact, the actual, I got this from the Prime Minister's office yesterday, there is still around 800 loads, 800 worth of trucks. In other words, the trucks have unloaded that aid and it's still sitting on the Gaza side. In other words, UNRWA and these other organizations have not got the people to collect them. And one of the reasons could be is because many of those trucks are being hijacked by Hamas, by Islamic Jihad, and by other gangs and groups. And those who are trying to take the food, and we've seen some footage of this, those who are trying to take food for their children, they're the ones who are being beaten and shot by Hamas. So you've got the United Nations blaming Israel because the aid is actually not going directly to the civilians. I get that, but it's not Israel's responsibility to get it across. It is the United Nations and various different aid agencies who are very, very wary at the moment for their trucks being hijacked and, of course, them being a gun being held to their head. That is the issue. And until the United Nations actually starts speaking about this and faces up to Hamas, because Hamas is still a great power in the north and certain parts in the south, although they've lost their entire leadership, as long as this happens, you're going to have the civilians still very, very hungry. And I think the truth should really come out. I personally believe what I'm hearing from the Israeli side because it makes more sense. And I've seen those footage, which have, by the way, been released. I've seen the footage of all this aid on the Israeli side. And if I can just add one other thing on this point, with regard to those numbers in Gaza, of course, it's important to stress that those are Hamas figures. And even though the United Nations also quotes them and other aid agencies, they're actually quoting Hamas. They're not quoting, they have not got the ability to go ahead and check every dead body. And I'm not so sure that those figures are correct based on who Hamas is and what they did on October the 7th.
Sure. All right. James Marlow, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. Although when we spoke of the figures, we did hear the representatives from both Israel and Palestine speak at the UNSC. Thank you so much for your time. For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.